I mean, and that is, I guess I'll use that as a segue into, the mythology of Freemasonry, right? Is that when you really start to look at the Masonic system overall, whether you're looking at it through, the original, intended 4 degrees of entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason, royal archmason, or you look at the York Rite or the Scottish Rite, basically, how Freemasonry evolved. It's always a search for a man trying to find the ineffable, trying to find the true name of God, right? And as you kind of look at that search for the lost word, you start to look at that in if you start to look at that in tangible ways, then you're going to miss the major truth that is there, because the major truth is going to come from that universe within. It's not going to come from anything tangible without.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. Those so if we look at the history of Freemasonry loosely and being completely objective and like I'm not paid by the Scottish Rite or the York Rite or any other right to tell you, where anything comes from. And what I say right now is completely my opinion. Uh, but I'm pretty well read. So here's the thing. Freemasonry is the way it exists today in this kind of allegorical system that we have accepted as the craft originally was not the way it was. I mean, we have this idea that we're some kind of morally upright philosophical organization, but our origins simply lie in protecting the wages of guild workers and ensuring that nobody takes credit for other people's work, that secrets of your trade, maybe it's sweating pipes, were not given to people who didn't pay their union dues. And so when we look at that, and then you look at, kind of the Enlightenment and Renaissance periods and how those might have influenced thinking, then you have an influx of people who come into the craft who dive back into antiquity to give it a history that is fanciful, is immersive, is romanticized above anything else. And then they create a ritual that amalgamates from systems that many people, occultists talk about all the time. And occultists try to create spin-off groups to separate the systems or whatever. But these systems, are really kind of timeless. They go from Grecian mystery schools to quote unquote Egyptian mystery schools to, um, you know, up through Roman Mithraism and temples, and all of these kind of schools. I mean, honestly, it's ritualistic appropriation by culture. And so each one takes it, right? And so the progenitors of this particular institution in the 18th century are looking at creating, something that is meaningful and has ties to things like religious and philosophical values. And so that's why we see all of these kind of things tied in and pull through. And so in a sense, it's kind of made up, right? And because it's made up, people they believe so heavily in masonry that they think that every bit of the craft and its tale and its archetypal kind of story is a literal truth, which again is a danger. But looking at it archetypally, or if you look at it in a way of saying this is really great teachings that we pulled from really great things in the past, and we packaged it in this system of degrees, so first, second, third degree, and then if you subscribe to the Royal Arch degree or whatever, it gives you this kind of complete picture of the grandiose truths that affect the person. And what is that singular truth? It's revealed unto the initiate. And whatever that grandiose truth is, I think I know what it is for me. And I think that just ties back to the same thing that it was, uh, at Eleusis or something else. Um, but regardless of what it is, right, it's a personal truth, right? And so you can't keep going out to get degree after degree after degree. We get guys who just chase all these organizations and degrees like they're gonna get it. I mean, the selling point of the Royal Arch today is you get the word that's lost. And then when you finally get the word that's lost, you say to yourself, I hear that word all the time. Like that word's on buildings, you know? and and then you go, oh, okay, right? And then the search continues. I always, not to harp on the craft or be mean about it. I mean, I'm a dedicated Freemason. I love Freemasonry. I love the craft. I'm a member of several organizations, and I spend, 50% of my time on this earth doing things for Freemasonry. But also at the same time, I think sometimes, I don't know, I kind of feel like, y'all, you ever seen Spaceballs, right? When yogurt is showing off all of the products and he's like, look at this, Spaceballs 2, the search for more money. Like that's Freemasonry. The whatever, right, the search for more money.
Right, right, because there's always going to be another right. Well, and I guess kind of to take it back, I mean, I I'll agree with you that the first instances of masonry, were in these trade groups, right? And these trade groups, they weren't all just there to protect secrets and make sure wages were given out accordingly, but they were also there to protect widows, right? They were also there to take care of the families in case someone I don't know, a giant block fell from a cathedral and landed on someone, right? Crippled them for life. They would still be there to be taken care of, right? And I think that that is one of the first instances of class action, right? Of a working class getting together and organizing to protect their own from these, rich interests or the monarchical interests at the time, right? And you start to see that core truth of right collected action to make your community better evolve into that enlightenment thought when you had all these brilliant thinkers kind of start asking these questions like Thomas Paine did, in Common Sense. And you start to see this, drastic shift in how the working class started to view themselves in relation to, the wider world, right? And until, they start to ask themselves, well, why are we allowing these monarchs to rule us, right? When we're the ones creating this productivity, we're the ones really moving forward. For colonial masonry, I'll just use the British monarchs as an example, right? So even to the point that a lot of these colonial leaders were Freemasons in that way, and a lot of times it's that separation of I guess private power and private work from these governmental system or monarchical systems. You know what I mean?
I'm just laughing because you mentioned Thomas Paine, who I friggin' love.
Oh, he's one of my favorite philosophers.
I have literally, uh, if people can see this, I have literal leather bound volumes of Thomas Paine. One of my favorite quotes from Thomas Paine, you just mentioned government. He says, government, even at its best state, is but a necessary evil. In
Yeah.
its worst state, an intolerable one. The man himself, I mean, did not mince words. He was egregious.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and I mean, I don't know. That's what you needed, right? And kind of going back on what you were saying about judging the past by today's standards. Even though you think of the founding fathers, though a lot of them did own slaves, and though for the most part the country that they initially created was to benefit wealthy landowners, At that point in time, they were the most progressive people on the face of the earth. Abraham Lincoln, even though he suspended habeas corpus, he was still the most progressive person on the face of the earth in that time. So much so he received fan letters from Karl Marx. So when it so yesterday's or I guess today's evil, is yesterday's hero, right? And it's always that progression forward, little by little. You take, a step forward, you take two steps back, kind of mentality. Because I mean, that's just how change occurs, right? But at every instance of change, primarily in the American story, Masonry is there in one step or another. And I feel like that initial progressive moral science, is I mean, it's pertinent to the American story, and I think that's what makes it resonate with people, primarily in this country.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, our founding documents are exactly Masonic tenets. Uh, we see the influence that the Masonic fraternity has on all of those documents. Yes, a great number of people who signed the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, whatever you want to call it, yeah, they're Freemasons, but like the experience that those people had, uh, you know, in terms, I mean, this is an age where Freemasonry, perhaps for the first time in a long while, maybe the only time it'll ever happen, and maybe that's just awesome in itself, and it'll never happen again. But Freemasonry had this point where it also stood for ideals that were not as popular, but the passage of those ideals during and with its influence created this balloon of like pride about the Masonic fraternity. But what's interesting is since that time, Freemasonry has not been as influential. We saw with things like the Capitol riots that happened, in January. Uh, we see that, and then there was always this kind of interesting point people kept making, and they kept saying, "How is what they did at the Capitol different from the Boston Tea Party? We celebrate those patriots today." And I didn't have the words to, because I don't feel that they're equitable in any sense, but I had to go to, I mean, I think Mike Shirley. I had to ask Mike Shirley. I said, Mike, what the hell do I say to this, right? And Mike, Mike doesn't mince words, and he gave me a statement that was, I was like, that's just all right, Mike. I'm going to use that. And what's interesting is the fraternity doesn't have that kind of same influence today. So what I'm saying, and I'm not equating the Masonic fraternity with Capitol riots, but what I am saying is what what was being called for at that point in our nation's history, we stood for, and that was kind of a political thing. And Masonry does not deal in politics as a matter of fact. And so, in my opinion, like any any awesome progress that Masonry, not progress, any great influence that Masonry had in the past in terms of creating a better life for people by way of physical action is gone. We will not see it again because in my opinion, we've neutered our ability to do that. Um, we do still see, like for instance, in France, where you have Masonic organizations that exist. There's two Grand Lodges in France. One is recognized, meaning it's been legitimized by other lodges and Grand Lodges in the United States and lodges around the world. But the other one also admits women and admits people who don't have the specific belief in a deity, and so they've been called clandestine. But some of the things that organization still does is looks out for things within their community. they do get political. And am I envious of that? I'm a little bit envious in that, not that I want to get political, but I think I should be able to go to my lodge and say, hey, the local plumbers union, they're getting trampled by so and so. I think we should stand up and march with those guys. That's just basic wage and living rights. Like, I think that's a good idea, but Freemasonry in large does not think that's a good idea. So
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with you on that because looking at just like membership rates in Freemasonry over the decades, you see this the last giant burst in membership Masonry had was in the 40s and 50s, right? And a lot of folks would say that that is because of a lot of guys coming back from World War II wanting that camaraderie. And historically I would disagree. I would say that the reason why you had that kind of an impact on membership is because of the progressive stances that Masonry had back then. They helped I mean, Freemasonry, if you start to research it, is indispensable from the labor movement of the 20s, of the 30s, and of the 40s. Trying to get these New Deal kind of laws passed, trying to get this reimagining of the American economy. Freemasonry was very influential in getting all these unions up off the ground and organizing these labor strikes and organizing these marches. And you see Masonic leadership, also being in union leadership, and it was so entwined once again, like I said, with that class struggle that I that it was a thing of honor within your union to be a member of the fraternity, even if it was only like a off the books kind of thing. So a lot of these guys returning from war, yeah, I'm sure they wanted camaraderie similar to what they find in the military, but they could have joined the VFW, they could have joined any number of these veterans groups, but no, they chose to become Masons because of how connected Masons were to the labor movement at the time.
yeah, I mean, like begats like. And when you have these kind of, I don't know what you call them, you get a line graph, two lines intersect, right? And you in masonry finds itself at a lot of social intersection points, in whether that's labor unions or that is the uh, in vogue thing of being completely social, right? Dinner clubs and all of these kinds of things, and going to social organizations. Freemasonry was really big on that. You see these pictures that hang in Masonic halls all over the world of 200 Masons packed into a room in a dining hall, and they're all holding their glasses high, and they got all the ladies, everybody's dressed to the nines, and it's really amazing. And we get all these guys today, and they say, well, we need to get back to that, bro. It is never going to be that, and I'll tell you why. Because that's just not where society is headed. We are there's a lot of people out there that say people today are just they're not connected. I disagree. Like, I think we're more connected than ever on two levels. Of course, electronically connected, right? But we're staying in contact more. And people say, what? But yeah, it's superficial though. Okay, so before I had, let's just say, 10 deep connections and maybe two superficial ones. Now I've got 15 deep connections and 150 superficial ones. I'm still more connected than I was before, even though we're expanding. And so when I look at Freemasonry and I think, that's never going to happen again, right? Because number one, we just don't have the kind of numbers to do that. I think our organization has some pitfalls that they need to be addressed if they want to be. We always get these calls like, we need more membership, and then the other people say, we don't need membership, we need quality people. It's quality over quantity, and that's true too. um, but like, if you want 200 people events, then yeah, you need to put it together. But we also have like a lot of ineptitude when it comes to event planning and staying current with you know modern day thinking.
Right, and just technology in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah, I mean, get a lodge Eventbrite or something, and who knows how that's going to work.
Well, I mean, it doesn't, I mean, it hurts that, your average member is what, probably 68 at this point.
Yeah.
So, they're not going to be prone to, to utilizing this new technology and to, kind of modernizing the craft in general. And I feel like, going back to that the discussion of stagnation that we had, it just seems like, when the craft disconnected itself from its progressive purpose, right? Whether, and I would still state that historically that progressive purpose is class mobilization. uh when you remove that, kind of purpose from it, because it's deemed political, now you're finding yourself in a position where you can't talk about any issues that are connected to the original intent that masonry had as a guild, right? And then was also reinforced, I would say strongly, in its ideals in the Enlightenment movement. If you've disconnected yourself with the purpose of the craft, then you're no longer going to have that connection to that ineffable, right? That path for your search for that ineffable, because the idea of struggling against tyrants, the idea of raising wages for your fellow community, right? Being that water that lifts all boats, not just your own. It only leaves you with those tangible things, and that's why you see just a focus on either getting guys just to take their degrees so they can pay dues, and just have an extra pair of hands for the pancake breakfast the following month, or whatever the case may be.
Yep, absolutely. Think about the founding of the country. I mean, what we're seeing at the foundation of the country is a group of people who got tired of seeing poverty. They got tired of seeing, uh, atrocities against the people and inequities between people. The One of the famous things that happened during the American Revolution is deals with Sam Adams. Sam Adams brought together a lot of people. He was the glue that held some things together within the American Revolution. Of course, he wasn't the top dog or anything, but reality, kind of a. I think he's like over a little over 40. He's overweight and kind of a drunk. But nonetheless, he's involved with something called the Boston Caucus. Boston Caucus is okay. So think about the word caucus itself, meaning kind of a group of people meeting together to form a political movement, or who agree on common position. And that position for the Boston Caucus, anyway, under the leadership of Sam Adams. Okay, he's intent on protecting the rights of Boston's lower and middle classes, as well as protecting social programs, social programs that also benefit those same classes. So what we're seeing here is a form of social welfare that he's upholding in his day-to-day life. That what you're talking about, the water that raises all boats. And so Freemasonry today can't do that. Uh, I mean, with that influx you talked about, 40s and 50s, and some of the stuff that happened in the 20s, made Freemasonry really popular because it did still stand for that stuff. Will those ideas that Freemasonry stands up to or stands for, and the things that it's supposed to stand up to, like intolerance, injustice, inequity, um, preserving the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's supposed to stand for those things. Those are inalienable rights that don't belong to like they don't belong to nationalism at all. Those are human rights. And Freemasonry has largely made a case of standing up for those things. But also, when that ideology has been tested in today's market, we failed.
Yeah, yeah, it's I mean, well, I feel like even human rights, and primarily in this political climate, I mean, granted, things have cooled down a little bit over the last few months, but given the political climate, even human rights have been politicized to the point that you are able to turn a blind eye to abuses of children being put in cages. You're able to turn a blind eye to people getting forced hysterectomies, right? Like things that are documented that happened by our
Mhm.
government, and we are not allowed to have an opinion of it, and you're not really allowed to discuss those things because of how divisive they are.
That's
and
right.
and yeah. Go ahead. I'm
I
sure
was
you
just
got
saying, like, let a politician say the word Freemasonry, and we won't be able to practice it anymore. That is the stance of a lot of Masonic lodges around the country. Some Grand Lodges, even. I mean, of course, I'm being overly. I'm imagining this scenario, right? It's conflated, but um, the point being is that Masonry in large today has taken this thing where it's like an excuse. They use it as an excuse. No politics as an excuse, and as an excuse for no action. But then again, the younger generation of Freemasons, me, myself, you, and we know quite a few brothers who are upset by this and don't stand that way, and we voice our opinions quite frequently. Um, and I think that's the body of Freemasonry that will continue to grow. That is the body of Freemasonry that will continue to gain traction and ultimately end up leading this craft into the next generation, and probably will redefine, or not redefine, but reestablish the tenets and the virtues that we stand for as an organization. I couldn't have been prouder for the Grand Lodge of North Carolina when they marched with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of North Carolina at the Capitol over the murder of George Floyd. I was like, that to me was doing what we're supposed to do, but it was considered political by many, and they denounced it. Masonry shouldn't have a stance on that because it's political. Oh, what part of human injustice and inequity is political? Well, all of it apparently, because we raise money for organizations that are supposed to fund these things. So because a politician has an opinion on it, it is political, and ipso facto, we're not allowed to talk about it. That's messed up.
Yeah, it just seems like a level of avoidance. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to place it on the generation, right, in charge of a lot of these groups right now, Congress included. But I feel like that avoidance is the reason that we are in this situation. And I'm just going to go off on a political rant here, is that both parties over the course of 40 years have used social issues as a wedge between their partisans, to make it that these economic issues are either not discussed, or are so are so drowned out by these social issues that they're just never addressed, right? I mean, you look at the recent stimulus package, right? Just because one or two senators said no, we're not going to have this, they scrapped so much of it that would have gone to relieve the suffering of American citizens. And that avoidance is the issue. That avoidance is the reason why we can't have a practical discussion and compromise on ways to sustain the middle class, because everyone's screaming about social issues. Everyone's screaming about now even conspiracy theories. I mean, it's the entire political process through avoidance has just I mean, it's just declined to the point that nothing can be accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, the conspiracy. I love a good conspiracy theory. I find them amazing and entertaining and scary, and sometimes they turn out to be true. And but I agree. The the issue I, the issue of a two-party system that continually works against each other while holding hands in some respects, and only backing certain things that are exactly the same based on who has put them on the table. Give me a break. You know,
Yeah.
work for the American people for once. I shouldn't say for once. I mean, there is a ton of good that's being done, but I mean, I just wish there was better I mean, I wish it was better bipartisan everything, and we stopped stepping on things just because of the word Republican or Democrat. I mean, good God, people are dying.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. There it needs to come to a time that when human rights trumps partisanship. No pun intended there. But I will. I know just to kind of go back. You said that this was the only time that Masonry, kind of went through this, and I'm gonna have to disagree with you there because historically, I believe right after the Morgan Affair, right after the formation of the anti-Masonic Party, Masonry. I mean, even through the Civil War and parts of Reconstruction, Masonry was completely disconnected from that purpose because they were shooed from all political life, and all political discussion in that regard. And when you look at like Masonry in like the 1880s to like the early 1920s, that's when you kind of had that romanticism that you were talking about come in, right? Where these guys came in and they started making up these elaborate degree systems, from all these different degrees that were just kind of being traveled around by these. I mean, they're almost like degree salesmen. You'd get a guy come across your lodge that claims that he could make you a royal master or whatever the case may be. So you start seeing this romanticizing of the degrees and putting them together into these rites, and you start seeing them connect to all of these schools of antiquity, and these myths, including crusading knights and Greco-Egyptian mystery schools. And I feel like it's that romanticization and the refocusing of the craft on these kind of more esoteric ideals that really grounded the craft overall, and kind of helped them rediscover that progressive purpose.
Yeah. Uh, I was when you said you disagreed, I just wanted to lean in and say wrong. No, you are right there. That is great insight. Um, and I think there is a definite, without the injection of the philosophical, without the backing of the kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, uh, early or late or early 20th century, late 19th century focus on the occult, without the focus on without the injection of the people interested in those things into this fraternity, who later uh, spun off countless organizations. I mean, the probably the two biggest organizations to spin around Freemasonry and from Freemasonry are really the ideas of the Rosicrucian schools. Really, and probably as much as I don't know, I have a real weird relationship mentally with theosophy, but theosophy in general has done an insane number on what is considered occult and New Age Christianity, Rosicrucianism, and they did a wonderful job of blending a lot of things together, and really removing the blindfold of the similarities between the systems, both religious, mythological, and occult systems in almost every major religion. Um, and so they definitely, that that injection, that refocusing, definitely grounded the fraternities for sure. Uh, and I still think that it is kind of interesting because people at these administrative levels of Grand Lodges, you generally don't think that they have any kind of clue to a lot of this stuff because they don't talk about it. And they don't you would think that like the CEO of a company who loves, you know, tarot might then say something about tarot every once in a while, or offer tarot to his constituents. Um, but no, they just say, they keep it administrative and charitable and tangible. I mean, there's a brother that I know who worked for a Grand Lodge and is a very esoteric individual, and he was like kind of the night cleaner for the Grand Lodge. And one night, while cleaning a Grand Secretary's office, all right on the Grand Secretary's desk, and like, you know, he flipped through it. Right, it's this big book on Rosicrucian theology and things, and just annotations all, or footnotes all along the sides of the margins of the book, and dog-eared pages everywhere. And that's when this particular individual said, I guess they just don't talk about it. It is weird, right? But the grounding, the foundation of all that is definitely there, and has kept this fraternity uh, healthy in a way.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's going to be the important the importance of this next uh, progression of masonry, right? Is that it's going to need that time to get more philosophical, to ground itself and reframe itself on those philosophical tenets. And it's, I feel that, and it may be a 50-year process, right? Similar to the way it was, from, the 1880s to like the 1930s, of this, regrounding in philosophical ideals, but that will energize and refocus the craft, back to those progressive causes, right? Of, being there to stand up for human rights, being there as a deterrent for human suffering, right? In any way, shape, or form, whether it's economical, whether it's political. Because, I mean, you look at the history of Freemasonry across, its entire span of history, and every time there is an injustice, there's always a Mason there, whether he's there or not, standing up against it. Whether it was, the brethren, Nazi Germany working behind the scenes, making or trying to, get people out through the Underground Railroad, similar to in the South as well during Reconstruction. A lot of lodges were participated in the Underground Railroad. You always see that there the more you look into it. And I feel that that philosophical reframe is necessary part of the process into getting that action, because you have to have an ideal, and you have to have those thoughts that come from reflecting on that ideal, and those thoughts are inevitably what turn into action.